The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening and welcome to the first webinar of our January Board Development Month webinar series, Nonprofit Boards 101, an overview of board member responsibilities. For those of you that are new to Grow and Lead, which I know there are a lot of you that haven't been on a webinar yet with us, welcome. A little bit about us. We are a capacity building center that serves Michigan's Upper Peninsula. We are also a nonprofit, and we help communities throughout the UP be a great place for kids to grow up by working to have an effective nonprofit sector, which in turn provides all of the services that youth need to thrive. So how we do that is through things like tonight's webinar, which falls into our training bucket, consulting, we have a membership program, and we provide facilitation. So if you'd like to learn more about our services, feel free to reach out afterwards. We do have 3 more webinars coming up this month. Next Wednesday, we'll cover board structure and committees, which will kind of dovetail off of tonight's discussion. The week after that, we'll talk a little bit about the board and staff relationship, how the board and staff can work together to move mission forward. And finally, we'll wrap up with strategic planning, and we'll look at different types of plans that your board can create to help move you to meet your goals in 1, 3, and 5 years. All right, with that, I'm excited to introduce Chad, tonight's presenter. Welcome, Chad.
Thank you very much, Victoria. So good evening, everyone. I'm really glad you're taking time out of your evening to listen in and hopefully learn something. So we'll be talking about the basic roles and responsibilities of nonprofit boards. And so our objective this evening is to learn about really the legal the legal duties of board members, and also understand the various roles and responsibilities of board members. Often we have found in our work here at Grow and Lead that people want to serve on a board, they want to contribute, they want to make a difference, but unfortunately you're not often properly equipped or informed about what you need to do and be ready to do to serve effectively on a nonprofit board. So hopefully this little beginners kind of some of the basics will help you have more of an understanding about what you're supposed to be doing, help you ask the right questions within your organization if you're serving on a board, so that you can help propel the mission forward. So the very first thing I want to say, for those who are serving, that you're on this webinar and you are actually serving on a nonprofit board, you are to be commended. And we want to say really a sincere, heartfelt thank you for the work you do in your nonprofit agencies. You are the heart and soul. You are the wheels that keep things going when it comes to nonprofit organizations. Everyone thinks staff because they're the ones visible or the ones providing the service, but the board is really the foundation of nonprofit work. So it really, as my slide says, you are the single most important part of any nonprofit. And I really want to emphasize something here when it talks about, when it mentions the most important body of a nonprofit, because the board is an entity that acts as one when you're making those legal and social responsible decisions. In other words, outside of the boardroom, you're individuals. Yes, you're serving on a board, but you're the real power of a board of directors and how it can really help a nonprofit succeed in their mission is when you come together in the boardroom, you use the power of your vote, and you act as one. You make a vote and you make decisions as a unit. And that's very important. So your legal responsibilities, you are the stewards of the mission of your organization. You take care of the resources, whether it's financial or human, but really the biggest thing you're safeguarding is the mission. That is your primary goal, to make sure you define what the organization's mission is and you provide the leadership needed to set the strategic direction to the organization so the organization knows where it's going, where it's headed, and you're directing that as the board. So you actively set policies that will help ensure the organization has both adequate resources to carry out its mission and that it has the parameters it needs to not overstep or get themselves into trouble, because that can happen. So, so the board also provides direct oversight and direction to whatever you call the top employee at your organization, an executive director, a CEO, it could be a coordinator, whatever it might be. But the board also sees the person, they usually typically hire that person, and then they evaluate their performance. So these are all these kind of higher level functions that a board does. And again, the nonprofit boards have a responsibility kind of to police themselves, evaluate your own effectiveness as a governing body, because the next point is your highest purpose is to act for the good of others, to act in the public's interest. So ultimately, you're not just serving the excuse me, the organization that you're serving on the board of. You're actually serving the community, because the community has buy-in and has a belief that, knowing what your mission is and the help you're providing to the community, they're trusting you to guide that organization to actually fulfill that mission. So when they give, whether it's of their time in volunteering or if they give of their finances, they're trusting that the board of that organization is making sure that that organization is actually doing what their mission says it's going to do, and they're not going too far or straying away from that. So you play a vital, very important piece in this whole thing of making organizations that serve the public and step in and help our communities. And so we thank you again as a board member. So now we'll kind of start helping you a little bit understand more of your role. And the first way we're going to do this, we're going to talk about legal duties. And so there's actually 3 of them here we want to really highlight and describe. And the first is called the duty of care. And what the duty of care really is, describes the level of competence that is expected out of every board member. So it's like, think of what a prudent person would do in a certain situation and how would they act. So it's about being competent, it's being understand, it's exercising reasonable care when making a decision in the organization and on behalf of the organizations. So what this could mean is you are faithful in attendance to board meetings. Again, the power of a board is in your vote. So if you're not at meetings, it's difficult for you to exercise your ability to vote and act as a unit. So showing up to meetings is important. Paying attention while you're there. I'm not going to call it any names, but I was at a board meeting recently and I'm watching someone across the room on their phone for about half of the meeting. I'm going, I don't know how you're actually understanding what's going on and decisions being made when you're looking at your phone. So be attentive when you're actually in a board meeting. Being prepared and reading the materials ahead of time. If you get a board packet or an agenda ahead of time, making sure that you come to the meeting prepared. Not what I've also seen far often is people reading the stuff for the first time when they sit down when the board meeting is supposed to start. Being engaged, in other words, make your voice be heard in the board meeting, and asking questions if you're unsure of something. That's a pretty important duty of a board member, is to not let things just slide, not things go, well, I really shouldn't say something, but really being able to have the confidence in yourself and in your understanding of what's going on to say, I don't understand what's going on here, because that's an important role that you play to make sure things are going the way they're supposed to. So real key things about this duty of care: be active, be informed, and make independent decisions that seem to be in the best interest, of course, for the organization and the public you're serving. The second duty is the duty of loyalty. So obviously this is your allegiance and your faithfulness to the organization. A board member really needs to give that undivided allegiance to the organization when making decisions affecting that organization. You're not ever supposed to use any information for your personal gain. Everything should be in the interest of the organization before your own. This is really helpful to have confidentiality policies and also conflict of interest policies come into play. Almost everyone that I know has a conflict of interest policy, and that's just to state out front if there's any chance there could be something that conflicts, or have a process in place where someone, if there is a conflict of interest that arises, how the board should deal with that situation. Because sometimes it does happen when business is being done. If you have a business person that sits on your board and they have a legitimate reason to bid on a project or offer a service to your organization, all they need to do is recuse themselves from that discussion, and they can remain loyal to the organization and not be championed for their own cause to get that business. So but you got to be careful with that one, just to make sure. Holding information in confidence. Again, a lot of organizations are the minutes are public record, or et cetera, depending on your organization types. We're not talking about that, but if it's just things that don't need to be discussed out in public, if there's still things that are being worked on, hold those things in confidence until it's the right time to bring them to light. So again, it's everything. Again, it's putting the organization before self. So yeah, and then the other thing to remember too is as your secretary or whoever takes notes in your organization, if a conflict of interest does arise, it's very important that the minutes reflect how a decision was made, especially if someone removes himself from the decision because they fear a potential conflict of interest, whether it's could be a relative that you're discussing or works at the agency, whatever it might be. But it just makes sense good business sense to make sure that stuff and those decisions are in writing so that someone can go back and see how the process happened and make sure things were stayed above board, so to speak. So excuse me. The third one's a duty of obedience, and this is going back again to being faithful to your mission. This is again a high priority of a board member, is to make sure that the organization is acting consistently with the central goals and the mission of the organization. The public trusts you to manage those donated funds or grant dollars to fulfill the mission. So whether it's your articles of incorporation, your bylaws, policies and procedures, other laws and regulations that might apply to your specific work, it could be state or federal or even local. The board is the one who really needs to make sure these issues are being followed and adhered to. So you don't have to be law experts, but you should have at least some awareness of the different things that your organization has to adhere to. So yeah. So just make sure you kind of know especially if there are standards, some working with children, some with other certain reporting requirements. Again, just be aware as a board member of what your organization might have to be following, so that you can make sure the staff is doing what they need to do and making the reports. And as a board, that you're making sure the 990 is filed, or other tax exemption filings or whatever. So make sure again that you're keeping within the law, you're staying legal, so to speak. One thing that came up, which was interesting, more interesting recently, and we decided to add it as a little kind of footnote to this point about lawful acts, is that increasing with technology and increasing with using electronic sources, we had a lot of questions about electronic voting for board members. And so I just want to touch on that really quickly. I dug into the state of Michigan's Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, and on their website, you can find a little definition of what the state of Michigan believes is the proper way to go about allowing for electronic voting. So the long and short of it is, the first thing you need to do is make an amendment to your bylaws stating that electronic messaging is permitted for voting purposes of your board. So if that's not currently there and you've been using it as a voting, I'd really highly suggest you talk to your board chair about getting that amended and put it into your bylaws, because that's the way it kind of protects you to make those votes then a legal vote. Also, you have to make sure there's some kind of a due diligence done, or making all diligence possible to ensure that the board member is the actual person submitting the vote and not someone else using their email address or their device. So it's a little tough, but we want to try to be, again, as above board as possible. So one of the things that the kind of the article on the State of Michigan site said is that when it comes to electronic voting, there's only two messages that can be sent, either a yes or a no. If there's anything else included in the message, it is triggering that there needs to be discussion on the article, and then it should be saved for an in-person meeting. In other words, electronic messaging is not the place to have a discussion about something you're voting on. So keep it to just yes or no. So you don't have to have any discussion. If anyone types in or saying some explanation or follow-up, you want to table that topic until you can meet in person and actually discuss it before having a formal vote. So just so you know, it's out there if you need to find it. It's just something that's new with the modern era. So if you want us to keep lawful and make sure you guys are staying above board with your voting and making sure those votes count and are captured the right way, by the way, to all the board secretaries, remember, you should capture those electronic voting too and make sure they go into the minutes of the next meeting so that they're recorded. So now we'll switch to the work of the board. You have a lot of stuff that you have to do as a board member. I'm sure I'm not telling any, unless you're brand new to a board, you're probably all going, oh yeah, we have got plenty to do. So a national organization that we look to mentions these 5 things as kind of like focal points of the big main things that the work of the board is responsible for. So they're not in any order, but we're going to take each one and I'm going to go into them a little bit more in depth. And as I do talk about each one, think about the organization that you serve on, the board you serve on, and think about what are some areas of strength in your board. And then also think about, okay, what's an area we need to improve? So look at both of those, because it's good to say, yes, we're doing good in this area, but also to be mindful of the ones where like, well, we're not doing so good in that area. So, all right, here we go. These 5 different areas of responsibility of your work. We'll start off with board operations. This is where you recruit and you orientate and you assess your performance. So the composition, the makeup of your board includes multiple things. It's your officers, who's serving in the officer's role. Typically, you have a chairperson, a treasurer, and a secretary. Many boards like to have a vice chair that can be there to step in, and also some organizations even use the vice chair as a kind of grooming someone to become the chairperson in future years. So that's part of your composition. The other part of your composition of your board is the different talents and skills and diversity that make up the board. Again, the more diverse board you have, the more ideas and viewpoints and perspectives you're going to get to inform decisions. So it's very healthy to have as diverse of a board as you possibly can. One of the things that shocks some people serving on boards is it's actually the board of directors' responsibility, or a committee of the board, to do the recruiting of new board members. In other words, if the staff of your organization is making recommendations or going out and actively recruiting the board members for your organization, that's not how it's supposed to go. In other words, boards are supposed to replicate themselves. You are trying, if you're serving on a board, you are trying to replace yourself by the time that you term off or your service time ends. It shouldn't be left to staff to find the board, and it's just not best practice either. The people you're tapped into are probably far different than who your staff is, and so it's actually part of your responsibility to make sure that all the seats are filled on your board. Also, this is another big one too, we see staff sometimes doing, excuse me, is training or giving orientation to the board. Again, this should be a function of one of your boards or committees. Stay tuned next week if you want to hear a little bit more about committees. But yeah, it's actually the board's role, whether that's one of the executive or the officers of the board or someone else assigned to get them on board, train them up so they're ready to go. The board also should be doing a regular self-assessment, whether it's on an annual basis, but they also can use outside sources like consultants to give and assess the board's operations, or to help kind of shore up any weak areas. Again, the structure of the board has to do with your officer structure, your meetings times and structures. How often do you meet? When do you meet? Where? And so again, the board, that's one of your main important things is governing yourself, replacing yourself, and then making sure your fellow board members, when they're new, are up to speed and ready to serve and have all the tools they need to serve to their best level. Strategic planning. This is determining your organization's missions, its purpose, its goals. It's the thinking and planning for the future. See, everyone hears strategic planning, they think, oh, a strategic planning retreat. But that's not. Strategic planning should be a normal, regular function of board operations and board meetings. You're always thinking and planning for the future. You're not just evaluating and overseeing what's been done in the past in the organization, like, oh good, yeah, the executive director is staying on task and meeting goals and stuff. That's wonderful. That's not just your only job, even though oversight is a job. You're also supposed to be pointing the organization to the future and thinking and being the ones planning for that future, staying true to the mission. You should be partnering with your executive director, to drive the mission forward. But really, it shouldn't be the executive director telling the board what direction the organization should go. You as a board member are that sentry, that guard that guards the mission. So the board really needs to work closely with your leader, your paid staff leader, to come up with the direction of the organization, and not simply just say, oh, well, our CEO or our executive director will figure that out and we'll just, rubber stamp it. That's not your role. Your role is really to help define and kind of work at that out, so that you're actually, in some ways, again, thinking about it as an employer-employee, the employer gives instructions to the employee to carry out their duties. The board is no different. You are the ED's boss. And so you're responsible for the organization's mission and purpose and goals. So you kind of give marching orders to the executive director or CEO or president or whatever you call that person in your organization. So you really play a big hand in that. Do you want your leader to come up with ideas and share ideas? Absolutely. That's why they should be attending your board meetings. But you cannot just simply rely on them and just kind of fly by whatever they say. You really need to take an active part in planning for the future. Resource development. This is the one where board members usually start disliking Chad. But that's okay. The ultimate responsibility for the organization's resources and the development of them falls on the board. Now, does that mean you're doing all these things? No, you have a human resource for a reason. If you have staff, you're paying staff to do work, to do certain things. But ultimately, the responsibility falls to the board. So I pointed out human. So human is they hire an executive. That's their one kind of human, but now they're watching their executive director. This is part of your oversight piece. You're watching them, making sure that any other employees that the executive director hires are being treated fairly, honestly, with integrity, et cetera, et cetera. So you are really, again, responsible for making sure the human resource is valued in your organization and being taken care of. That also includes not overburdening or burning out your poor executive director. If you're in the UP, which is our main area of service for Grow and Lead, a lot of executive directors do not get paid to the level of their counterparts in other places in the country, yet the expectations are just as high, if not higher, when there's even less staff. So be careful, board. My encouragement to you is really value. If you have a good executive director, you have a good director that you've hired, make sure you're taking care of them. And that doesn't mean you can go and pay them what they're worth. You probably, maybe you can't. If you can, you should be. But if you can't, there are other ways to make sure they're not burning themselves out and you find yourself scrambling to find someone else to lead. So make sure you're taking care of and watching that human resource, which is so valuable. Moving along, the financial resources. Yes, when a board sits and sets a budget for the year and approves a budget for the year, they're telling the community, they're telling the staff of the organization, we're going to have this. This is the monies, this is the budget, we're going to make this happen. So ultimately, yes, staff does fundraising. I'm sure many of them do. Executives and directors are responsible for, you know, searching for grants, whatever. But it's very much also the board's responsibility to ensure the organization has the needed resources to meet their mission. So yes, board, if you thought, well, I'm not going to get involved in fundraising, yes, you should. Now, remember, just really quickly for those who just winced and instantly didn't like me, fundraising looks very different. In fact, I like to use the term fund development better than fundraising, because fundraising, everyone thinks about events. They think about those nitpicky little things that just, they take so much time. I got to sell tickets, whatever it is. No, fund development means there's multiple different ways to raise funds for your nonprofit organization. And again, the board should be helping research, use networking for those individual donors. But that's some of your role, is to make sure the finances and the financial resources are there for the organization to do the work, or help in the process of finding those and making sure there's enough. So really, again, this goes back to, it's a partnership again with your director, whoever your director is, your executive director. You partner with them in the resource development to make sure the finances are there. There's also the physical resources, and that could include if you have any buildings, equipment, maybe even vehicles or whatever. Again, the board's making sure that that stuff is being maintained, that the staff is taking care of that stuff so that does not fall into disrepair and is no longer valuable to the organization. So again, resource development, an ongoing process. Well, I mentioned this a couple times already, but again, the work of your board is your oversight. So a big one is providing financial oversight. If you're responsible for helping find the money and get the money, then you're also, a big part of your responsibility is making sure that it's being used correctly. So you want to make sure that every legal and ethical integrity and accountability are happening when it comes to your finances. Most boards have a separate finance committee whose sole job is to make sure the finances are being tracked and accounted for correctly. So, so that's obviously an important piece to make sure that nothing's wonky's going on, if I can use that term. So the other one is your programs. Remember, this is oversight. In other words, you're not micromanaging. Let the director, the executive director, CEO, whatever it is in your organization, let them actually fulfill and carry out the programming with their staff. We're not talking about micromanaging, but we are talking about monitoring and making suggestions to strengthen programming and services, so they can help, you can help the staff and help your leadership, your paid leadership, be the best they can and provide the best services and do the best work. So you're definitely kind of like that airplane, you know, 10,000 feet view, kind of looking over things and making suggestions, but not micromanaging. All right. So remember, a basic organization chart in a nonprofit is the boards at the top. You guys are the leaders. You hire your executive director, and the executive director then hires the staff and collect and gets recruits volunteers and manages those people. So you're responsible for the executive director. The executive director is responsible for their staff and volunteers, and you support the director, and then you assess their performance. So that's kind of how you can help impact programming. So when they come and tell you what's going on in programming, again, you're there to kind of monitor and determine if they're on the right track and if performance is matching expectations. Again, legal oversight, keep yourselves legal, do whatever you can. If you can get a lawyer on your board who's willing to, you know, help guide you, wonderful. But make sure you know the areas that you need to stay, the requirements, whatever the requirements might be for your organization to keep you legal, because there's just too easy to slip up. So that's part of your oversight, to keep your organization legal. Don't pass the buck. That's your job. make sure your organization is legal. The last one's being ambassadors, and this is pretty huge. The whole idea of the ambassador is that you're an advocate. You're out there in the community with your friends and family, with your coworkers, whatever, and when the opportunity arises, you're talking about your work with the organization you serve on. You're talking them up. You're showing why it's important that that organization exists, talking about the impact of what the organization is making on the community. You're trying to enhance the public standing and awareness of what that organization is doing. Hopefully you're serving on this board because you have a heart and passion for its mission and whatever population you're serving. So let people know. If you have a chance to present at an event or stand in front of a group to kind of talk about your cause, take it, do it, run with it. That's being a good ambassador. Sometimes the executive director needs opportunities and doors opened in the community, or to have a sit down with a certain person or whatever. And if that's in your sphere of influence, use it. Open that door. Let them be better, again, enhancing their ability to do their job and fulfill the mission. So that's what being an ambassador really means. You're being a spokesperson. You're going out in front, encouraging people to understand why the organization is important, why it's worth supporting. And then you're also opening doors for your executive director to help them do their job even better. So the great thing about ambassadorship, it doesn't have to end after you leave the board. In fact, a great way to keep in touch with and keep connected with former board members is to ask them to continue to be ambassadors, and maybe even setting up some sort of a way they can get tools or news or whatever and continue to speak on behalf of the organization. Again, if they enjoyed their time serving on the board, then many times will be more than happy to keep up the talk and keep talking up that organization. So use those former board members. They don't have to disappear and be something of the distant past. They can still work, even if they're not serving on the board, but work to help enhance the organization. Okay, so good board members. This kind of sums up everything we were just talking about, but I wanted to make sure we gather it all in one place and summarize it. So to be a good board member means you attend, you're actively participating in meetings, you show up to special events. Yes, you even if you didn't have to run it, the staff is doing it, you show up to fundraisers. I know, grimace. It doesn't have to be that bad, but you show up. Your face being there is important. I served on a board not too long ago, and one of the things that was really encouraging to the public was they'd come to an event and we'd have almost 100% board attendance at special events. It's just unheard of. We had like the whole board would show up in support of something. If your board can break that, that's a really cool thing, because it sends a loud message to the community that this is so important that look at their whole board showed up, not just one or two, but a bunch of them. So really being actively participating, not just in the boardroom, but outside with what's going on in the organization, really sends a strong message. So again, we talked about becoming prepared for those board meetings. In other words, do your homework. Yep, if you actually have to look at it as homework. Read your agenda, read the items that are going to be discussed. Make sure you're ready to have really good conversations rather than spend time at the meeting reading about it and trying to be caught up. Instead, you come ready to talk right away and to discuss and to make decisions. It will greatly shorten your board meetings if you do that, believe me. So thinking strategically and generatively, you're asking questions about, so what attributed to a successful outcome for this program or event? So you're looking at the big picture. How can it be replicated, or what can we do to improve it later? You're not looking for the small details of, well, why wasn't this set up on time? No, that's micromanaging. Let the director talk to their staff about such things. But you're looking for the big picture, and then I'm thinking long term, like, wow, that was good, but we could do even better. And here's ideas, thinking in the future, 1 or 2 years, we could build this to this, or we could expand to this. That's the kind of things the board are looking at. They're linking at a high level view and trying to generate ideas and discussions. All right. Again, in those board meetings, If you have any concerns, I think I've told this story every time I've done board 101. I'm going to tell it anyway. I sat on a board, brand new, second meeting. An issue came up and we were discussing it at length. And I sat there going, I'm not comfortable with this. I'm not comfortable with this. But no one was saying anything. And so towards the end, where they're getting close to making decisions, and I raised my hand and said, I don't think we understand what this extra work this is going to take. And I think we're kind of hedging on a line here of something we don't want to get ourselves into. Sure enough, the accountant and the lawyer on the board jumped up and said, I agree with him. That's absolutely, it's like, why did you guys have been serving on the board for a long time. Why did you wait? So don't ever be hesitant to speak up. There, truly what teacher said, there is no dumb question. If you don't understand something, if something feels off or doesn't make sense, say something. I think they'd rather put up with you asking a lot of questions than letting things go and not asking the tough questions and running into issues like many of us have heard of some organizations get into problems when people didn't dig deep enough into decisions or know what was going on. So yeah, speak up, make your voice heard. Okay. Serve as ambassadors, be out there, definitely make people aware of what's going on in your organization and why it's important. I highly suggest that you have, whether it's a policy or not, I'd even say make it one of your board policies is to make a financial contribution at least once a year. Why that matters? That matters because if you don't believe enough in your organization to give to it, why do you expect anyone else to give to it? Some grants and other ways of getting money will actually ask if your board, how much percentage of your board financially contributes to your organization. So that's another good reason if you're ever writing any grants. Notice here, there's no dollar amount. I don't think you should put one in your policy unless you have a long, lengthy discussion and you all agree unanimously about it. It's the idea that to give and say everyone has given. It's not about how much, because everyone has different means and different ability levels of giving. So the fact is giving is the important part, not the amount necessarily. So, and again, you're supposed to help your executive director identify and solicit new donors, or if you have a member organization, again, opening those doors, introducing those connection points. So don't be afraid. I don't think if you've hired a good executive director and you trust that person, they're not going to abuse that relationship or make you look silly or whatever other fears are we have when it comes to introducing our connections to our directors. Believe me, if they had any training and experience, they will treat that relationship with like gold, because that's exactly what they are. So other things we hear about, that I hear about in boards that I want to kind of really give a heads up about, we hear things like, there's too much absenteeism in our boards. They don't want to fundraise, or they've been on the board for 20 years. These are all symptoms. We hear about boards that are struggling. They're not the problems themselves. All of these things can be solved with simple little policies and education. Absenteeism, you have an attendance policy where someone simply can't meet the meetings at a certain amount of time. Maybe they're not ready to serve on the board or their time has come. Not wanting to fundraise, again, sometimes the biggest thing a board member's lacking is information. So we can give them information. Being on a board for 20 years, if that is not working for your organization, you can come up with term limits. So in other words, boards don't sit around and complain to each other about the problems. Find solutions. Good board members are looking strategically to solve problems and get out in front of them and not wait back and sit and go, oh, nothing's changing. Be the change. All right, enough on that. 3 hats of role clarity. You play 3 different roles as a board member of your organization. So the one that's the most powerful one is your governance role. It's your formal role. It's when you call that board meeting to order, when your quorum is present. By the way, your bylaws will say exactly what constitutes a quorum for your organization. So once that quorum's met and you say formally start the meeting, boom, now you're the ultimate legal and moral authority for your organization. But you act as a unit. No individual interests should be in that boardroom. No individuals, you become almost one. You're acting as a unit because your power is on whatever the vote decides. That's your formal hat. Implementation hat that you wear is when you get delegated certain authority or power, and the board gives that authorization. The most common way of implementation, committees or task forces. So in other words, a task force or a committee has a certain set of structures or parameters that they're allowed to operate in, and that's it. So the finance committee is going to have a little more detailed oversight over the finances of the organization. But that finance committee is not going to go and talk about and tell the outreach or marketing committee how to discuss, getting more people to an event. That's outside their parameters. Their parameters are look at the financials, make sure we know where the money is, how it's coming in, where it's going, etc. So that's a kind of, so the implementation part is a limited authority, limited power granted by the board that gives a specific authorization or parameters or power to do a certain task or tasks. So you wear that one sometimes as your committees meet and the work is needed. So, and the last one, the one you probably wear more often than not, you probably, I don't even know if some of you think about it, but you wear it most often, is when you volunteer. Whether it's your time and the work you're doing outside of the boardroom, maybe it's not even a committee task, it's something that the director said, oh, I need help with this or this. And you go, oh yeah, I can help with that. I know how to do that. And you're volunteering, you're at an event and you're helping move chairs, or you're inviting people to an event to fill a table or sponsor something or whatever. So when you're in this volunteer mode, it's very important to remember you don't have any individual authority. Your authority is mainly in the boardroom with your governance hat. You have limited authority in your implementation when you're doing your committees or specific tasks designated by the board. But most often you're volunteering. I will share my one famous story of the fundraising event where a board member approaches a staff person and starts chewing them out about something that's not how they thought it was supposed to go. And the poor staff person is horrified because this is a board member who is chewing them out about something, but the staff person had been following the directions of his executive director. And so caught in between these two, not knowing what to do, runs and finds the executive director to get confirmation that they were supposed to do it, which was correct. The executive director had to pull aside the board member, remind them that they got this, it's okay. The training here is board members, when you're at an event like that, that's being run by the executive director, staff, and or volunteers, even if you're volunteering there, you're not a board member. Wait, you have the title, you're serving on the board. You do not have the power of a board member. The power in that situation is the executive director who you're paying to lead your organization. You are merely a volunteer. You can only throw around your weight as a board member, again, in the boardroom when a quorum is present and it's formally meeting. That's when you have power. But outside of that, again, you're giving your time as a volunteer to help serve the organization. So let the ED run the show when it's time, and you have the power in the boardroom to help big direction, big decisions going forward. So, all right, just want to make sure you understood that one. I love this slide. This talks about the division of responsibilities between a board and its executive, whoever you hire. So it kind of hopefully kind of shows the definitions of how the differences that CEO and ED is looking for the day-to-day, the operations, how things are supposed to happen, the means, the how, the when, the where, the strategies and procedures to get assignments done and how to document them. And that ED then makes recommendations to the board. The board's response is really concerned about end results, the what, the why, how much, how well are we doing with this one? They're looking for mission and goals, and then their power is in the vote, the final say. They actually have the final say. So, but my favorite part of this slide is the bottom of it. You see, if in your organization, if the foundation is not trust between your executive director and your board, you're in a lot of trouble and you really need to do some soul searching, because without that foundation of trust, you're never really going to get anywhere, because neither of them can trust the other, and you have to have both. The board provides the vision, and your director, your executive director, implements that vision. That's the way it's supposed to go. And I also want to point out, to re-emphasize what I said at the end of that last slide, notice that the left-hand column says board. It's not a separate board member. It's an entity, not an individual. You're collective. You're together. So hopefully that helps you look a little bit. If you're confused about who's supposed to do what in the organization, look at this slide, because all of you will be receiving this slide probably, if I know Victoria, probably tomorrow. So you'll get these slides so you can look over more. Okay, so tips that we've found that really help when you're talking about having an effective and functioning board is you have an effective orientations. In other words, again, boards, if you're a new board member or you've been on your board for a long time, make sure there is effective orientation happening for new board members. January is the time why we do this series this time, is because so many new people are coming onto boards. If you haven't gone through an orientation, ask for one. If your people at your chairperson on your board says, I don't know, executive director, do we have an orientation? If they don't have one, have them call us. We can help them set up one. Seriously. It's one of the things we can help with in your organization, is how to develop an effective orientation, so that, again, once you hit the ground, you can still go running, help make decisions, be informed, know what you're doing, not just sitting back and waiting. I had one lady tell me that after a board 101 presentation, that she'd been serving on boards for over 20 some years, and until that evening where I shared the simple roles and responsibilities, she had no idea what she was actually supposed to be doing as a board member for 20 years plus. Yeah, that's someone who never went through an orientation onto any board she ever served on. That's just a travesty and a waste of time, both for the organization and that individual board member. So train your people, have them prepared, have them know what they're walking into. We encourage you to type your mission on the top of every agenda. If it's staring you in the face on a monthly or quarterly basis, how often your board meets, it's staring right there. It's easy then to look down during any meeting and make any decision and make sure that it's adhering to that mission. So that's why we encourage that, because I guarantee you none of you, or very few of you, have your mission memorized for the organization you're serving on. So have it right in front of you. Have it right in front of you so you can't forget why you're there, what you're doing, why your organization is important. The mission moment is a chance for any board member to share something that's happened since the last meeting that shows the organization in action. It's an example of something good that's happening. It's meant to be the encouraging story that says, see, this is why we're doing this. And hopefully you're involved enough in the organization in some fast shape or form that you can actually have mission moments to share. So look for opportunities to share those. Those things will encourage each other, greatly encourage each other, and spur each other forward when you can see the impact of what your organization's doing. So share those. And then once you start sharing them in your board meeting, it's a great way to collect those and share them then out in the public when you're looking for opportunities to speak or whatever. Evaluate your meetings. You can always do better. Sometimes it's switching your format. Sometimes it's making sure things are much more effective as far as time goes. We spend a lot of time in a lot of organizations on too much conversation discussion. What am I saying? I'm not saying you don't discuss things, but we have these ongoing conversations that really either should be tabled, should be set to a committee, or whatever. But we spend all this time going over and over and over things that shouldn't be done in a boardroom, and everyone wonders why 2-hour board meetings happen and they're frustrated and don't want to serve on that board. So if you conduct evaluations of how you do your meetings, you can self kind of assess what areas can be shored up. And I was just at a board meeting last night with an organization that we're working with, and they cheered when the person running the meeting said, hey, we did it in an hour. So yeah, strive for that. Hour's good. You should be able to get all your work done in an hour. Discuss this training and others that you may see, whether it's in our series or our YouTube page. There's a bunch of recordings from past, but take the time in your board meetings to do trainings to help yourselves improve. whether it's help yourself govern better or understand how to run your committees better, how to recruit better, whatever the issue might be but look to train yourselves and not just say, okay, we're just going to plow forward and make it up as we go along, but really seek out. And Growing Lead's great. And it's not saying just because I work here, but it's great at providing those resources, whether it's like a webinar format or if it's one-on-one, if you want more of that in-person consultation. But we're here to help you be the best you can. And we're a huge believer, as I hopefully you've heard from me about board members. You're so important to these organizations, and we've seen the devastating results of poorly trained or poorly informed board members. Don't let yourself get there. Seek out the right answers and the right training to make sure you're the best possible board you can be, because there is help available. Speaking of which, here are some. This is just a small sample of the things we can provide here at Grow and Lead. So if any of these strike you guys, oh yeah, we need help with that, or came up in that discussion as I talked tonight, there's a lot of these different things that we can help you with, and many more. So if your issue or topic's not listed, give us a call, drop us an email, whatever it might be, and we can see if we can help you out. So there it is. That's essentially the board 101 in a nutshell. I know it was a lot there, but it was kind of basic for those of you who might have been serving for a long time. Said, well, I knew that stuff, but it's good to have a refresher. And I'm glad you tuned in tonight. For all you veteran board members, all you new ones, hopefully you learned a lot and know now what questions to ask, how to go to your board chair and say, okay, wait, are we doing this? And if we're not, like, what do we do about this? So don't be afraid to ask questions. Make sure you understand your role and responsibility. If you need additional help, reach out. My contact information, email's on there. Come to our Facebook page, go to our web page. There's our phone number on all those places, whatever you need. But we're here to help you succeed, and we're here to serve the nonprofits primarily across the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So thanks again for tuning in. We're grateful that you were on, and hopefully we'll see you in the next upcoming weeks with the rest of our series. Good night.